Yes, hello, thank you very much. My name is Elisabeth Skarðhamar Olsen, and I'm a PhD student at Lancaster Environment Centre in the UK, and I'm also affiliated with the University of the Faroe Islands, where I teach. My research area is in the intersection of food studies and the environmental crisis and the inequalities related to the environmental crisis and the future visions. So today's session on the food for the future, I will be speaking about the economic principles embedded in traditional Faroese whaling and what they might teach us about sustainability and food policy. The Faroese practice of traditional whaling is a sociocultural system which for centuries has been fundamental to Faroese food security. The Grindadráp, which it is called in Faroese, means the etymological meaning of it is that is a school. Grind is a school of pilot whales in Faroese, and also this is also the name of the meat, of the meal, of the whale meat itself. And the practice of Grindadráp involves a number of socio-economic relationships and principles from when it is spotted until the actual meal. And it's these kind of economic relationships and principles which I would like to argue today might be fruitful for Faroese food policy makers to draw inspiration from. So the kind of questions which I would like to say something about and invite us to think about today, they include what characterizes some of the economic principles embedded in traditional whaling, and how might food policymakers draw inspiration from this practice. So yesterday we heard a lot about the nutritional benefits of marine mammals, the contamination of marine mammals, and the importance that they have as a food source. But my presentation will instead shift the focus a bit on from the consumption of whales to the particular type of economy and mode of access and distribution embedded in the Faroese traditional whaling. But before getting to this, it makes also sense to say something about the background for why I think that this is interesting and when debating the future of food and food policy making in general. That has to do with the fact that as we all know, we live in a time of global environmental crisis, and we all know that and recognize that climate change is happening, and ecological footprint calculations, which are a form of ecological accounting of the global economy. They tell us something about. They tell us that we are actually in an ecological deficit of almost one planet, and so this is of course the average, and it's. There's also great inequality there when you look at the countries in the global north and the global south. We are using maybe up to 3 to 4 planets in the global north, and it's less in the global south. So at the core of this crisis, or the fundamental problem and challenge, which any environmental social scientist will arrive at if they do their job well, is that we have structured our society and the global economy upon a principle of competition and on economic growth. So a society which, in order to function, needs to increase production and consumption. And this is the fundamental problem. And I think also most people accept and recognize that this is the problem. The challenge, however, is that we have let this define and control the infrastructure of our society and economies, and not to forget also our food system. So transitioning our society's economy from this growth dependency is probably the greatest challenge that we have. And this is also at the core of the global food system, which means that food production today is often more concerned about producing a commodity and making profits than producing food for people. So this infographic was produced by Oxfam 10 years ago, but the numbers are similar to current estimates. 1/3 of all food which is produced is wasted. Many people, we already know this. Over 800 million people are in chronic hunger. 80%, approximately, it's estimated 80% of those people under chronic hunger actually work in the food industry. So when people say that we need to produce more food to feed the growing population, it's not entirely true, because we currently produce enough food. However, we have a problem of access and distribution. And if we zoom in on the Faroe Islands, then we also see that Faroese fish catches, they grew from 79 kilos per capita in 1903 to 14 tons per capita in 2003. And at the same time, and this is the paradox, no? Dietary trends suggest that Faroese people eat less fish today than they used to. And also recent local events and debates also suggest that there's a growing inequality, and actually there's food poverty in the Faroe Islands, although we are also at the same time one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And another reason for global food insecurity that we are seeing is also related to what happens at the so-called commodity frontiers in the global economy, that where raw material, natural resources are extracted. This is where we see displacement of communities and grabbing of land areas from communities in the name of development often. And this creates these conflicts where communities protest. This map is just illustrating. It's a research project which tries to illustrate how many conflicts there are around this. And perhaps also not surprisingly, when just looking in the Faroe Islands, we also see conflicts happening related to the industry. And in many cases, particularly in the global south, the reason why local communities protest such industrial development is because these extractive activities threaten the local food security of people living near the extraction sites. So, and also when speaking about the mercury contamination of marine mammals and how this affects Arctic food security, then this also constitutes like a similar externality of the growth economy. So once you begin to recognize and take these things seriously, it can feel quite hopeless and dystopic. However, but it's comforting to know that at the same time there is also a very lively scholarly debate which revolves around how we might change or transition the economy from being growth dependent and even towards a state where, in the wealthy part of the world at least, we will degrow. Questions that scholars like this ask is how might we organize our society, our economy in a different way? What kind of policies will help us transition towards such an economy? And importantly, for my topic here today, in this debate, many scholars are also suggesting that we have much to learn from so-called pre-modern societies, including remnants from pre-modern times that are still in existence. And the practice of Grindadráp, the Faroese whaling, presents us with such an interesting case of an economic practice which continues to exist parallel to the modern growth economy, if you will. However, as we all know, the practice has also received quite some negative attention from animal rights organizations. Yet despite this, and despite official health recommendations also, as mentioned earlier, the whales are contaminated, many people continue to consume whale meat. And it's a combination of these phenomena that spurred the interest of me and my colleague, and also a PhD supervisor, Ragnar Boadóttir, to look at whaling as one of these non-growth-oriented practices. And some interesting characteristics of the whaling of the Faroese Grindadráp from a degrowth perspective include that it's a non-growth oriented and non-monetary practice also. Survival through cooperation. There's a fair division of the catch between members of the community. It's also an example of mutual aid. There's always been this principle to allocate a part of the catch to vulnerable groups. And by analyzing also the narratives, the narrative struggles of between anti-whalers and Faroese people defending the practice, it's also quite evident that a key reason for why Faroese people continue to consume meat, whale meat, despite the alarming health recommendations not to do so, is that Faroese people consider this practice to be a more sustainable and eco-friendly food procurement strategy than purchasing imported foods from the supermarkets. So in the age of environmentalism and with so much awareness and call for sustainable lifestyles, it makes no sense for Faroese people to abandon this practice and this strategy of food procurement, because it constitutes such an excellent example of a sustainable economic practice. Also it's interesting that in the discourse of the Faroese government, you also find this same narrative that they are defending the practice to the outside world, emphasizing its non-growth or aspects. So meaning that even our politicians and government officials appreciate that this type of food system is more sustainable and just than the relationships that make up the global food system. And it was also clear, I think, in the welcome address of our minister yesterday, he emphasized these same aspects. So from this perspective, it might be fruitful to think beyond this difficult dilemma of whether to consume whale meat or not. I think it's important that health authorities continue to inform us about the risks involved with consuming whale meat. But I also suggest that we shift the political and societal debate in the Faroe Islands when it comes to whaling over to how the whaling practice might inspire Faroese food policy. So this point emphasized by the government is the principle of solidarity, and it's while in the sphere of the whaling economy, this principle is so fundamental and untouchable. It's a paradox that when it comes to the fisheries and aquaculture, we have it's almost exclusively growth, and there is this principle is completely not there. At this end, also this point that I made before about the situation in the Faroe Islands, even though we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we have also at the same time inhabitants that are very food insecure, and with the current threats with the war in Ukraine, the food insecurity stemming from there, these trends are also might increase. And meanwhile, we have the annual catch of the Faroese fishery fleet, which is estimated to be 14 tons per capita. Yeah, and the right to food, if everyone doesn't know, is actually also a human right, and so thus makes it even more important to address this issue. So with all this in the back of our head, the point that I would like to end with here is this question, which is also the topic of a project and an article that I'm currently writing with Ragnheiður Boadóttir, where we ask how could food security, or actually some might call it food sovereignty, and how could this be enhanced if some of the principles embedded in the practice of Grindadráp became part of Faroese fishery policy. Would it be possible to integrate these principles that we have value so much from the whaling in also the fisheries? So yes, that was it. Thank you very much, and I understand that we don't have questions now, but you're welcome to come and talk with me later after the session. Thank you.